Welcome to the Vlusical Spaces podcast, episode 3. My name is Nico Holloman, and today I have a very special episode for all of us, which is a discussion on how to deal with anxiety with Dr. Michael Clemmens, who is a world-renowned gestalt therapist and a good friend of mine, someone who's helped me a lot. So he's going to give himself a brief introduction, and then we'll get right into the episode. So I hope you get a ton of value from this, and I thank you for tuning in. Let's get into it.
I'm Michael Clemmens, and I am a psychologist and a gestalt therapist living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I've been practicing gestalt since 1980, when I was originally trained by some of the founders of a place called the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland, and Laura Pearls, the co-founder of Gestalt, Frederick Pearls' wife. I work with a lot of people who come and are curious about their body and the kind of disconnection from their body selves with others, and the entanglement of body experiences, trauma, history, and ways of being. I like to work in a way that is very relational, that is, I'm not just observing people. I'm a contact partner with them in it. And my practice is mostly that in my private practice. I have done a lot of teaching all around the world, some out in California at Esalen, a lot in Europe. And my focus has been in the teaching is on training people to develop what I call a somatic intelligence, practitioners learning how to use their somatic experience to guide them and to attune to other people. So that's my thing. That's my interest. And I'm really glad to see you again.
Likewise. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to share some of your wisdom and go into today's topic, which is going to be something that I think is going to be super relevant to many people, especially right now. And it's definitely been to myself, which is anxiety. And so the first question that I have for you is, in your work of Gestalt therapy, how do you define anxiety? How do you see it? What is it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was thinking about this when you asked me to do this time with you. And historically, Gestalt has originally defined anxiety as excitement without oxygen, which is a little simplified. But what Fritz was talking about, and I think I would agree with, is that there's a lot of movement or desire to charge or excitement in the nervous system, and the person somehow is not supporting themselves. And often that I see that in their breathing. His second definition, which is the one I really like, and the one I work off of a lot because it's more about the fullness. This definition is that anxiety is a desire to succeed or accomplish something, to thrive, coupled with a catastrophic expectation. So like, I really want to get this job, but I'll never get it. Or things don't work out for me. Or I want to talk to this woman and I can't breathe, and something's going to go wrong. I think that's the kind of typical anxiety that gets presented and that people come with. And in fact, I'm not interested in getting rid of anxiety, Nico. It's a sign that something's going on, rather than a symptom that this is bad to be eliminated. So part of my definition also is exploring what it is that the person is becoming anxious in response to, and defining that as well, which is the sense of here and now. Like, what are you responding to? And sometimes that takes development to know that. There are people who have what we call like free-floating anxiety, and they're They come and they're worried about things, or they're anxious. They don't even know what they're worried about. They can't sleep. They go to the doctor and they're having problems breathing, and it turns out there's nothing wrong with their breathing, but in fact, they're gasping and kind of worried and agitated about what might be. I think the present situation, to say a little more, the present situation with COVID and these kinds of collective traumas, like natural disasters. I mean, I've been out in Big Sur, and I knew you have, and it was like there's enormous forest fires, the road is cut off, mudslides, or people in horrific situations. I think there is almost a sense of collective anxiety about the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually accurately a fear of the unknown. What interests me as a body-oriented gestalt practitioner is, how is that person responding to this given situation, their job, their relationship, the disaster? How are they responding in their body? And do they know how, do they have enough internal supports to slow themselves down, to explore what's going on? So for me, using Laura Pearl's definition that the work is about supports for contact, the first place I want to work with someone is a sense of what is happening in them, how are they situating themselves, how are they sitting, how are they breathing, what is their pace, and really attend to the balance between the inhale and the exhale. And begin to have the person feel into their body and to notice. Because a lot of times anxiety is like other kinds of fears, like similar, like phobias. Yeah, they're out there. And I want to take the work in here, while still acknowledging there is something out there. No, it's not helpful to people to tell them they're projecting. It's just not helpful.
Yeah.
Like, really. So, there's something out there, and we live in a context. So the anxiety that people experience in their body is situated in a certain field condition or context. And right now, the big one is this pandemic and people's fear of getting infected, fear of not having jobs. And they're feeling a lot of what I see is enclosed, trapped, frustrated in their attempt to move, to express, to even touch each other. And then what happens is that I work with some people and they start feeling like it'll never end. So that's a more calm example of what I was saying is a common here and now situated anxiety. I want to say a little bit more, but I want to know if you want clarification or have any more questions, what I'm saying.
Yeah. So it sounds like the first definition that was, in your words, a little bit simplified was anxiety is excitement without breath, or that was one of the originators, Fritz Perls' definition. And then the second one was that it had to do with projecting some sort of enormous expectation onto a situation. Or
even a hope, enormous hope. Yeah, go ahead.
Got you. Yeah, I just wanted to see if I was restating, especially that second point accurately, because that reminded me also of, I don't know if it was a Lao Tzu quote or something, but that ancient master who wrote the Tao Te Ching, I believe he was the one who said anxiety has to do with worry about the future. And so it'd be interesting to hear you sort of clarify that a little bit and what exactly. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. You're talking about outcomes and expectations. often there is, when people are consistently, we might call chronically or frequently anxious, there's a narrative that goes with it too. And that is, things don't work out for me, or, I'm not a lucky person, or you can't trust the world, or a lot of these kind of beliefs. But the process, along with the kind of high charge in the body and the shallow, more quick breathing, is accompanied by a fear of what's going to happen, a desire for it to be a certain way, but a fear about what's going to happen. And in that, the person is not situated in their body and in the present moment. Because we don't know what's going to happen.
True.
We have no idea. People say the best predictor of the future is the past, but what we're really doing is using what's our own history and saying that's going to happen again. So, Nico, I think that's what it's about, and that some people have a lot of difficulty just sitting with not knowing. So then, of course, what we do is then race to fill in a possibility so we feel more comfortable. And that can be in the form of hopes or dreams. When those are usually negative outcome, someone becomes anxious. Classic example of that is what we call death anxiety. People are so afraid of death. They're always making sure they're okay and healthy, or they're worried about other people. There's folks that get so anxious even getting near a cemetery. Those are big examples of not being in the present, but projecting, if for you, like 40 years from now, this is what my death is going to be like. And of course, you can imagine anything. You can become very agitated by it, because in the truth, the future is completely out of our power and influence. And I think when someone's anxious, I think we know that. When we're anxious, I think we have a sense of that. It's like sometimes grasping at the future.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that clarification. And another interesting thing that you said that would be interesting to go into is how you were saying it's not about, or you're not interested in people getting rid of their anxiety, but instead learning how to inquire into it and have deeper insights, with the anxiety being a vehicle for sort of deeper self-exploration. Is that accurate? And could you elaborate into that?
Yeah, I would add one more thing with that. Is certainly in Gestalt, we're interested in what is. We don't begin with trying to change the other person. We explore what is. Like Robert Frost said, the only way out is through. So that's the starting point, as you were just describing. Also, people need to learn ways to manage their stimulation in their nervous system and their breathing in order to be able to inquire. So I remember I had somebody who he couldn't sit still ever. And so we did our sessions walking. And we walked all over Pittsburgh. Yeah. And by about halfway through it, he started to get a little winded, but he started to talk about how his body felt, and he could slow down enough and feel into, and then begin to notice, oh, this is what I'm worried about. This is what is happening with me. Sometimes he and other people are going, their speed, their RPMs are so high that they get so anxious that what they notice are the symptoms of the anxiety. The clamminess, they feel like they're having a heart attack, sweaty palms, incessant talking, nervousness. And in order to do what we were talking about, to like work with and inquire, one needs to be able to support yourself by breathing and feeling into your body, feeling the ground. I ask people, can they feel the chair? Can they feel the seat there? Where are you? Can you feel where you are? People who are anxious sometimes literally don't feel like they're here. Like you said, they're out there.
It's relatable.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. So my job is to support a lot of down energy and to ground myself in my stimulation, to feel my feet on the floor with the person, almost like an anchor with them, so that and in my voice, so that we can have an encounter that allows them to modulate the degree of charge that they have. Mm-hmm. That supports inquiring.
That totally makes sense. And this is kind of a perfect segue. I'm going to just flip us into gallery view here real quick. There we go.
Cool. Were you going to pull us into a gallery view?
Yeah, I just flipped us into gallery view. I don't know if it changed your screen at all, but it just kind of made us...
No, I've been in gallery view all along.
Oh, okay, nice. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that really stood out about what you said and that I loved is that when you were working with the guy who couldn't sit still, instead of trying to do a session with him in which you're like, okay, just sit still, like we're going to make this work, you accommodated what was happening within him so that he could get to the place where that was even within his capacity. And I think that segues really beautifully into the question of how you view the importance of the body in gestalt, specifically working with anxiety, and maybe some examples of ways that you work with it in those specific cases.
Well, as I've been saying, in gestalt, and the way I view it is that anxiety is partly an overstimulation in the nervous system, breathing, and clearly mentally, which is also located in our body. When you get stimulated, when a person gets so I said this before, but so stimulated that they can start to feel dizzy, they can start to feel lost and confused, initially might feel very, very restless. And often this anxiety, or really almost all the time, that anxiety is what occurs in the beginning of what we call a kind of context sequencing, like the beginning of an experience. And people are frequently anxious at the point of things like feeling a feeling they don't want to feel, recognizing something. Anxious, they feel anxious. This is now we're getting into the about, but in their body, at the point of taking action, reaching, or doing a behavior. One of my students who went to Duquesne did his dissertation on what you call the yips in sports, and when a golfer just suddenly can't putt or a pitcher can't throw, and it's all anxiety. It's really all anxiety. There's a lot of ways that people get anxious at the point of acting. I think almost everybody can remember that moment when you were first invited to dance, maybe with someone, if you were someone you were interested in, what happened in your body. And people experience that about lots of things, like driving a car. And so I want to pay attention to supporting the breathing, having the person feel themselves, but where are these reactions in their body? Sometimes it's like rubbery legs.
Mm.
And or tightness, like here, um, and anxiety also occurs at the point where people are experience something or accepting and integrating it. Like, I don't want it to be true.
Mm.
And reminds me of there was a little kid who lived in my building, my office building, who he didn't want to come in from playing. He was a really cool little kid from Korea. And his mother was getting him and everyone else in, and he would start breathing really quickly. And then what he did was he went like this. He covered his eyes. So he said, I can't see you. And then he went like this, I can't hear you. And the whole time he was starting to go faster and faster because he was knowing it was the time for the day to be done, and he didn't want that to happen. And he was really getting scared. And I noticed what his mother did is what I end up sometimes doing with client. And she came over and said, it's okay. Tomorrow's another day and we'll come back out and do this. And he said, you promise? And I noticed as he did that, his breathing started to relax and the hands got away from his face. Some of the work is paying attention to how the person is blocking themselves and inhibiting themselves like he was. We don't all usually go, I can't hear you kind of thing, but there are lots of ways that people do that. And from a Gestalt perspective, I want to make people aware of, are you aware of what you're doing right now as you're telling me this? So I want to slow down, and that felt a little quickly the way I said that. I think the one way anxiety is present in people's body, and this may sound weird, but is in their speech. The quality of their speech, pressured speech, or a lot of explaining. Because they become anxious of letting the naked truth just sit there. So they, and I would ask them, well, can you notice what's happening right now as you're talking? Rather than tell them what they're doing, I would rather elicit from them. That's my stance on a lot. And Gestalt is what we call elicited awareness. Can you notice what you're doing as you're speaking? Again, coming back to awareness. And I remember my client saying, I feel like I'm going really fast now. And I can't get enough words out. And I finally said, well, what are you afraid of? He said, I'm afraid if I don't explain a lot, get this all in right now, our session will be over and you won't understand me. It was about 5 minutes into the session.
Nice.
So I pointed that out and I said to him, can you feel your fear about me not getting it? Where do you feel that in yourself? He said, both here and here. I'm looking at you and my throat is getting really tight. So as you may know, but for your readers, and Gestalt is really about kind of peeling the onion, like you have an experience and staying with what is. It really became that whenever he had something to say to his parents, they literally timed him. And they would say things like, get to the point. And he was scared as a child, very scared. So he learned to try to get everything in, like a soundbite. And what he was living with is what we call a fixed gestalt, is that as he was doing this in his body, he believed it didn't matter. They weren't going to get him anyway. So he had the need to express in his body, which he could feel, and the fear that it wasn't going to happen.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me, are you all right with me using a personal example of, something I experienced?
Please.
So
it's you.
yeah. So I remember in I believe the last time we worked together that one of the first things that you helped me notice was that my chest was concaved, and
Mhm.
I sort of wanted to I tend to dwell on the more mental, non-physical swirly planes of, you know, spirituality, sometimes bypassing my problems, like a body comes second, let me figure this out at the source. And but what became so profound to me in the two times I worked with you in a more one-on-one context was that simply by noticing how my body was reacting and starting at the most visceral level, that so much of the confusion and things I was trying to figure out mentally came to light simply by examining why my chest was like that. And I came to realize I'm kind of in this defensive, protecting myself against the world standpoint. And that led me on this exploration of understanding my very primal survival fears better and helping
Mm.
me make these shifts that were necessary for me to make on a very human level or physical level, you could say, but that had such deep roots in my psyche that looking into something like that and really giving it my presence and my breath was paramount to me even being able to do the more sort of spiritual development that I was aiming for. And so I think that's something that's so interesting about your work, that it really enlightened me to how pivotal it is to include the body in one's process of inner development, and how much I overlook that and how much I feel like a lot of people, both in the spiritual world and just in their daily lives, likely overlook giving that presence to their body, and understanding that, hey, maybe this, my leg constantly needing to move, or my inability to sit still, or my concave chest, or my tight throat, has these is like the body's call for, hey, let's inquire into this. and
Mhm.
yeah.
I was going to say something.
Please.
Ron Kurtz, a very famous body worker, had a book that the title was "The Body Reveals,"
Mm,
and I think
beautiful.
that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Or your body speaks, Nico, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Hmm.
100%. And it's so interesting to me to explore that, especially when I had been in a sort of 2 or 3 year period of exploring Eastern Advaita and things of that nature, which are very much in the camp of the body is an illusion, the physical world is an illusion, and should be, for example, in the book that I have, the Ashtavakra Gita, the very first page is, if you want to realize your true nature, shun the senses like a poison. And so it's very
Mhm.
much like, from a certain angle it does make sense, but it's very easy to interpret that as, let me ignore everything that's going on
Right.
here, and sort of spiritual bypass, which I definitely did my fair share of. And yeah, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, and in the sense of, do you feel like some of those philosophies are missing the point?
Mhm.
Yeah, mainly that. Is
Good
there?
question. I'm
Yeah.
familiar with what you're saying.
Mm,
Um, I think part of the challenge is that we like things to be all inclusive
mm,
and explain everything.
yeah.
And certainly Gestalt does not.
Mm,
I also think that different approaches emphasize different aspects of human experience. They're pathways. Um, On one level of consciousness, I can experience my body as an illusion.
Mm.
I think that's true. I'll give you a quote back from Fritz. Fritz said, lose your mind and come to your senses. It's just totally polar to that. Where I would position myself, and I think, because I don't think it's misinformed as much as it reflects a bias that is in a lot of religious traditions, certainly in Christianity, of the Judeo-Christian approach of the body as like a source of sin, and the spirit is arising, ascending. The way I think about it is, I think of body and self as all one and the same. And our experiences in our body, in our senses, I see as part of our making contact with the world and ourself. Even almost every spiritual practice, particularly from the East, involves an extraordinary amount of breathing focus and asanas, positions, physicality to support the work. That's what I'm talking about. In Gestalt, it has to do with how do we explore the meaning. Meaning comes from not going up. That's not how. So there's a guy named Maury Berman who wrote a book called Coming to Our Senses, and he talks about the ascendancy model that people want to try to reach nirvana, reach and go up and understand. And the message of Gestalt is that I can make meaning and understand and eventually move up by claiming myself down here. And so I've been around some very powerful spiritual people. I'm thinking of Thich Nhat Hanh. And that guy's really in his body. He's really in his body. He's breathing. He's sitting down with. So I think anytime we separate body, mind, or spirit, I think we're leaving out part of experience. And it goes the other way too. Sometimes people could just be grunt and groan and like not support the meaning or what does this mean to you? But we get to meaning through sensation and awareness, that process. I think those cultures, those approaches, get to meaning through a kind of meditation and focusing process, which is highly enhanced by the way in which the practitioner uses their body. So it's the role of the body, not that there's a bodilessness, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I like what you said, especially all of it, but especially in the beginning where you said we kind of look for an all-encompassing solution. Like I'm looking for the meaning of life on that first page, and I want it to address every nuance of the situation, when really it sounds like each sort of philosophy includes the body, but maybe emphasizes it or de-emphasizes it in certain ways, or like you said, in the East, maybe doing the powerful breathing and yogic exercises, but not going into it in quite the same way that a Gestalt therapist might go into it. And
they're not as interested in expression with their body or the body as we are in Gestalt. So you might go in those disciplines, you would be really some of them very corrected if you were sitting this way and trying to breathe, to use your example. Literally the master sometimes smacks people in the back in Buddhism with the stick to make them sit up. My interest in that moment was to inquire, what are you doing when you're doing that? That's
Right.
the difference in approach, with the belief that what you're doing, that what we do is an expression of who we are, and there's a function to what we do, particularly anything that is a repetitive pattern.
Mm.
It's part of who we are.
Yeah, and that seems to also make all the difference. And I could be wrong about this, potentially being smacked on the back and adjusting oneself can inform the mind in that sort of body to mind way. What I know
Absolutely.
it definitely can, yeah, but it feels to me on my journey that there's something a bit more stable about inquiring why it went there in the first place, so that there's an awareness of if when it happens again, which it almost inevitably does, that we're equipped to kind of dive into that place that we've already explored with more of a headlamp the next time, and be like, okay, I know I did this time last time, now let's dig even further.
I think what we do is embodied mindfulness. So in some ways, it's not that different. All like the notion of all roads lead to Rome.
Mm,
Um, that I think being afraid or not trusting the world would come out eventually in the meditation. I think it would come out. It would probably come out as, and ironically, when one does this, if you do this and really breathe fully, there's room in your airway then to breathe, and there's room to cry. There's room to laugh, which many Buddhist monks I've seen do that.
mm.
Um, so there's a whole body element that's happening. It's a question of emphasis and method of exploration or inquiry.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. That reminds me of a teaching that one of the teachers that I follow talks about, how in his terms, when you raise your vibration higher and higher through practices of self-inquiry, then all of the emotions and the belief systems that are fear-based have to kind of rise into the light of that vibrational threshold that we're holding, and then they all sort
Exactly.
of bubble up to the surface, which in certain experiences or in certain contexts um, can be quite difficult to manage. I find meditation to be the best, in my experience, inner environment in order to deal with some of those things, or something like a one-on-one or group session that's facilitated. But I know sometimes these things can also be ignited by something like having a psychedelic experience or something like that, where we almost externally amp up our brightness, and then afterwards people feel the low where they were so high and now they have greater clarity of all the things that they're freaked out about. And that's happened to me almost every time that I've had a psychedelic experience before. So um
Mm.
a little bit tangential, but I think just yeah.
Yeah, I think what you're raising is what I was thinking about is that we're talking about releasing what it feelings, thoughts, attitudes, stances that we hold in our body. It,
Mm,
because we do. And those are different pathways to getting to do that, as you talk about.
mm.
The 6 rhythms is five rhythms.
Five
The
rhythms.
5 rhythms, yeah, the 5 rhythms definitely headed in that direction. Trance dance moves people to. It's not magical. What happens is that holding patterns in the body get released and softened and unwound.
Mm,
Um, and so, in a psychedelic experience, in a very expressive gestalt experience, what I notice is that usually just talking about what a person thinks in the same way they always have doesn't release much at all.
Yeah.
It's kind of like repeating your story.
Yep.
And sometimes repeating your story, it gets more locked in your body.
Mm. Mm. How do
Do you
you,
want to?
so what were you going to ask? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I would,
I
I
wonder
would,
if you had a question.
I was sort of ignited by the idea of what you said about being locked in a cycle, because I know that one of the main things that I experience with anxiety, and that I know a lot of other people who experience anxiety feel, is that it just kind of keeps coming, and there's sort of a relentlessness to it that one can go through. One of the terms that I've been using lately is this endless process,
Mm-hmm.
where it doesn't matter how much I inquire into what the source of the issue is and how many times I come to peace with it, there's always another situation that brings it back. And I'm just like, I, I'm like, have I learned nothing from all of these things? Or I thought they were so profound and uprooting of these anxious feelings, but all of a sudden it's back to haunt me once again. And
It's
so,
like the fly you can't get out of your house.
yeah,
You
totally.
know, you want to get a fly out of your house and you're chasing it around, or a bat or something.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And or like a fly that can fly through walls or something too. It doesn't matter how strong your bunker is or something. So,
Yeah.
how do you address that, the cyclical nature of anxiety in that way?
Yeah. The word gestalt means configuration or pattern,
Mm,
right? In the arts. And in Gestalt psychology and then in Gestalt therapy, what I'm looking for is the pattern by which the person becomes anxious. What you're reporting is, oh, here's that damn fly again, or already into it. I'm what I would address is, how did you get there?
mm,
What were you doing? What are you doing now? How did you get there?
right.
Um,
So I just had to plug my computer in.
yeah. So I was also thinking, I want to put this, is a good time to put it, is that trauma survivors, people who have experienced trauma, have considerable anxiety,
Mm,
um, and very strong patterns of dread and relentlessness. So what you're describing is intrusiveness. It's
mm,
intrusive. You can't get rid of it, and you want to get rid of it. I would focus with you on how you got there. What happened right before? Can we go back? Paradoxically, I might ask the client if they could be more anxious. Could you like amp this up 100% or 50%? Like, could you, things creatively, like, could you imagine your anxiety as some sort of, well, we were talking about a fly and a bat or something. Could you imagine your anxiety as some kind of animal, and bring that animal here? Um, and what does the animal look like? How does it walk? How does it move? Um, or maybe even feel that in you. Uh, Generally, I want to focus on the how and not as much in the why,
mm,
and somewhat the what, but like what they're anxious about. But usually, at the point that you're at, people are tired of what they're focusing on. If they're sick of being anxious, it's almost like they don't even care anymore, but they keep getting driven by it.
mm,
So this, in some ways, in our bodies and in our minds, has to do with letting go. As much as you might, or someone say, I really want to let go of this, I might explore, well, how would you do that? And what would happen if you didn't worry about this?
mm,
And then you hear things like, well, I'd be surprised, or things would turn out really badly. Um, that again, it's in an invitation. Anxiety is to, the Germans use the word, which you probably are familiar with. I believe I'm pronouncing the word right, nicht, Nicht. It means nothingness.
Oh, nichts.
Nothing.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, nothing.
Yeah.
And the early analytic people talked about, could you pronounce the word again?
Nicht or nichts,
Nicht.
like nothing.
Nicht.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the moment of anxiety, a lot of times that's what we're afraid of.
Mm.
And it's an unwillingness to be with the moment of, I don't know. Because having a fixed idea or a fear is a familiar orientation, however miserable it makes us.
Mm.
That's one way to go. And another is going back again. Can you feel it in your body? And help the person bring, as I was describing, in the present moment, a little bit more lively of what they're afraid of, what they're worrying about.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I will ask people to be that,
Mm.
the thing they're afraid of. I had a client who was afraid of bullies. Well, he was bullied in school as a young man, as a young boy. And he had since gone to the gym. He was about 6'2", 230. He had been in the Marines, and very popular, what you call man's man kind of guy. Absolutely terrified. Absolutely terrified. He punched a telephone, an old telephone, in a wall because he thought it was someone behind him. And he came to see me. He's like, I just am so on. This is some trauma, but I'm so on cue here. I'm already lined up. And so I just had him be the thing that was following him or was right around the corner. And to try it on his body. There's another way of, the only way out is through. And he could feel, he eventually became the bully in his grade school. And he could feel that kind of quality, which took the mystery out of it. Anxiety is often mysterious what's going on. So embodying our fear or what we're anxious about can help us move through to getting clarity of what it's about.
Mm. And so what if someone like myself, to keep using myself as an example, if there's the knowledge of where the anxiety is coming from, what the belief is, in my case, like in the future, I will not be safe, or I will not have the support structure I need to follow my highest excitements, and I'll be confined to a life of doing stuff I don't want to do in order to survive and things of that nature. Despite there being a ton of clarity about what it is, and I think I will ask you, just for my own clarity, to understand the difference in your definition between the how and the what. But just to finish that thought, despite having so much clarity about the what, it doesn't seem to make it easier, even if life continuously confirms to me that the fear is unfounded.
Yeah. So a lot of times when people work with other folks, they want to try to get rid of unfounded, unrealistic fears. Okay. That's the notion of projection here. Everyone's not out to get you. I might support you in that maybe part of what you're saying could be right. So what? So what are you doing about that right now? Rather than dissuade you of the idea, let's go there. Okay, so what are you doing as you're imagining that? as you're imagining being confined and all your, what's happening in you?
Mm. Yeah, it feels like my center of attention gets sucked out of the body and sort of into my skull or into my brain, and just sort of almost like feeling like my eyes are rolling back into my head, and I'm just like going into this tiny little vortex of like some sort of dimension of doom or something like that.
Could you show me again that movement?
Yeah, it's like
Because that was a movement. That was,
yeah.
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 So what you're doing is this.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
And so as I do this, I'm so aware of too much visual stimulation. I could see everything. And my breath is very shallow.
Yeah.
So I had another word for how I felt than anxious.
Mm.
I just want to offer it to you, because this is how it might work with someone.
Mm.
When I do this, the word comes up for me that I'm frightened.
Mm. Yeah, it does look like a kind of.
Yeah. And I'm frightened and overwhelmed with the possibility of what might happen.
Mm.
It's not happening now, but I'm getting ready for it when it might happen.
Getting ready for this. It's like the
Ah,
preparatory. Yeah.
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 Uh-huh.
Yeah.
How's that sitting with you? How are you feeling hearing what I said and what you just did?
Mm. It feels. I'm gonna just let my body answer it rather than just jumping to an answer.
Yeah. And use I. Can you just say I feel?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Sure.
Was I saying you just for my own knowledge?
You just started to say, I think I asked you, what does that feel like? And you started to answer, it feels. And I
Oh,
thought I want to get us off that track and support you saying I feel.
got you. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel like in that fear state, it feels, I feel very fight or flight-y, kind of like I'm either about to sprint away from the avalanche or I'm about to claw at it.
Mm.
And I feel the sense of adrenaline, sort of this high, almost like I'm on speed, or what I imagine that might be like in a very low form.
In your arms, in your legs.
Yeah, specifically in my hands, my feet. Like the ability, like I could just take off running, or I could just take a quick jab at something, and sort of I feel a tightness in my stomach as well, sort of in my solar plexus, and a numbness where in sort of like the bottom of my sacrum, like where the root chakra might be.
So you can't feel your ass. So,
Yeah, pretty much.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
It feels like the energy there is very dampened or deadened somehow.
Hmm. there's a lot of either up and forward or back, but not much down energy in you.
Yeah. Yeah. My body associates down as staying in place and calmly facing it, which in that state doesn't feel like an option.
Got it.
Yeah. It feels like if I stay in place, I'll get hit by the rocks that are avalanching.
And the world or life is just a series of avalanches?
Not always, but often. That's how I respond to it. Or a lot of my time is spent with at least a percentage of my energy being driven by preparation for the next avalanche. So it'll be like I'm making this song because I love making music, but also because if I don't have enough songs, then I'm gonna yeah. Yeah.
So I just want to take a pause here in what we're doing, because you so generously have offered your own experience in our process. And I'm very, very moved by what you've gotten into. I also want to acknowledge the method, the way in which I've been working with you.
Certainly.
If that, because that's kind of what you're on about here as well.
Yeah, totally. Please.
Yeah. So I'm aware of two things that I did. One was I asked you to notice yourself. And a couple times, and notice what was happening in you. I also tried on your movement with you. I reflected it, I embodied it for you. This led you to a lot of the what, or like what it is you're concerned about, what you're afraid of. And it became a theme, avalanches. But it also seemed like you slowed down during this to me. If we were continue to work, what I would want to be interested in with you is how, in order to support yourself, either to fight or flight, you still don't connect with the ground. If you want to fight or flight, you need your ass and your feet. So you can't, you end up flying from here or fighting from up here. There's something about, there's a way in which you kind of lift off or numb yourself. So what I would want to explore with you is having you begin to notice your legs a little more, and your capacity to walk away or to take a stand, because I think you're not sure. That's my hunch.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly everything you said resonated, and especially when you reflected my movement, I was maybe only 2% aware that I had even done this. For those who are just listening without video, kind of like the classic I'm scared, hands in the air by the face sort of position.
Yeah.
And that it was like, whoa, my body almost gave you more information than
you wanted,
that I was trying to give. Or I mean, in this case, I'm very open about it, but it was more telling really than probably what I was saying. And part of that is the essence of why I find your work so interesting and why I want to help bring it to the world. in this
Oh,
fashion is that, yeah, people, I think if I'm not aware of it as someone who does a lot of self-inquiry, certainly most of the people I hang out with who are dealing with anxiety aren't looking to their bodies to see what information they can find about how to heal and so forth.
can I respond just for a moment?
Please, yeah.
Oh, there's always a part of any of us that we're not aware of physically. Because what we do in our body is so much a given. And like the way I use my hands, it's so much a given. I was raised by a mother who used her hands like this. And part of the art of doing this kind of work is to reflect back to someone else by showing them what they're doing without shaming them or teasing them. So many of us have the experience that of feeling as if when something is pointed out about our body that it must be wrong. You know, do I have spinach in my teeth? Or, oh, is this tie wrong? Is it... When you ask someone something about them, frequently people say, well, what's wrong? So part of what I was doing, I felt like, was talking to you from the nature of our relationship out of a warm curiosity about how you did yourself, not trying to expose yourself, not trying to expose you or, out you in a way. And I think that's a big fear people have about their bodily self. We desperately want to be noticed, and many of us are terrified to be noticed. So it requires a finesse and an attitude of well, Rogers, excuse my coughing, Rogers and Buber would say, is an absolute positive regard for you. I do it because I'm interested in you. So, excuse me.
That's all good. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think it's such an important part to hold space for people in a way that is curious and caring without shaming, because our whole culture is pretty much subconsciously shaming each other all the time for whatever's not perfect by whatever cosmetic standards. And the main question that this brings up for me is, given what we've talked about so far with how important the body is in the journey of self-exploration and the cyclical nature of anxiety, and what can people, like, what would you have people take away from this in terms of they're maybe on their own, they don't have access to a gestalt therapist, or they just want to take it as far as they can by themselves? What can they start to explore that would help them come to their anxiety, or what perspective should they take on it, or do you think?
I think I would encourage people to first start noticing their breathing, the rhythm of the breathing. And I would say, I know that you're thinking about this problem or worried about. As you do that, not instead of doing it, but as you do that, I want to suggest you find your breath, to use that Buddhist phrase. Find your breath. And just notice and be aware of your breath. And see if you can influence it a little bit. See if you can make your inhale and exhale just a little bit longer. So instead of one, inhale, out here, exhale, one, like to the count of one. Let's see if you can make your inhale, exhale to the count of two. And then three. Because then you'll feel more, not just sense this drivenness. You'll have more awareness. So that's the one thing I would suggest people to do. And then the paradoxical second thing is what is it you're afraid of? What's the worst that could happen? Okay, and then ask yourself, is that happening now? Or am I getting ready for it to happen? Which invites the person to notice the present moment, to come a little more into the present moment. So those are the two things I would suggest. Breathing first, then the other.
Nice. And so if the person listening to this who has the anxiety is they've deepened their breath and they've sort of illustrated their worst case scenario to themselves and are viewing it from a state of presence, then if I'm speaking from that sort of mentality, the thought that inevitably arises is, okay, how can I make sure that this situation doesn't happen, or that I don't have to ever deal with this situation arising again? And
that you're worrying about.
Yeah.
The situation you're worrying about.
Yeah.
So I have a very hard thing to say to you. You can't. You can't. We can't always ensure something won't happen. We might talk about ways, if it's about safety and situation where you don't put yourself in a situation. People get anxious about driving cross country or on the Pacific Coast Highway or something. Well, you could take someone with you, et cetera, et cetera. There are things you can do to support yourself, but in the moment, what you're doing is focusing on what is going to happen. And in the moment, you can't make sure that doesn't happen in your imagination. And that's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah. It sounds like what you're saying, to an extent, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if one is, like I said, we've deepened the breath and we're in the present moment, but then all of a sudden the thought of, so how do I make sure that this doesn't happen in the future? Suddenly we're not in the present moment again anymore.
Well said, Nico.
Yep. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it might just make you, like you're aware of that now. Like, oh, you just noticed that. I might say, there you go again. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the cyclical thing, is that maybe the thing this should be obvious, but I guess it's coming to a new light for me now, is that it's not the anxiety as some sort of external thing that is cyclical in nature, but it's sort of our desire to dash out of the present moment and entangle ourselves in whatever the anxiety-inducing imagination is. That's the cyclical thing. And
yeah, it's our unwillingness to trust the unknown.
Yeah. Sometimes the unknown seems so it's hard to have quality. You want qualities to trust, but the unknown is sort of qualityless, except for the fact that has no qualities.
Right. Wow.
So
that's that niche. That's that niche you were talking about.
Yeah. So would it be fair to then say that part of the healing of anxiety is to learn to have faith to a degree?
Trust, but that not in the future as much as in the present moment. And that is the result of exploring how we're the meaning we're making, what we're afraid of, and how we're getting mobilized. I think that trust or faith comes after a process of exploring this. So taking what seems like it's out there, coming back in here to what am I doing? Oh, there I go again. There I go. What would happen if I didn't do this? Is really the secret sauce. What would happen if I didn't do this? I got audited by the IRS one time, and which was not fun, but I worried that I started getting anxious around early April, like, oh, it's going to happen again. It's going to happen again. And I met someone at a dinner party who happened to be an IRS agent. And he asked me what I did, and he asked me some psychological question. I said, well, let me ask you. And he said, the chances of us doing that are about 1 in 15 million. How are those odds for you? And I walked away thinking, oh, I'm sure I'm going to be that 1 in 15 million. And what it was rooted in was the experience in me and my body and myself of being audited. It's like, so going through that and recognizing that there's a point where, I don't know, it's about letting go, not clenching. Anxiety is a clenching. Trying to ward off something, or we're afraid that it's going to come. And the work through our body is about finding a way to letting go. And that would be, through our breath, through our spine, just traditional psychology and some Eastern philosophies believe that the mind drives the body. That the body is a reflection of the mind. What we've come to learn is that it's actually a reciprocal process. It's not unidirectional, it's bidirectional. So how you are in your body influences what you feel and think.
I could see, if I'm, again, sort of speaking from the anxious listener, potentially, that so when I asked if sort of the answer was some sort of faith or trust, that you made the important clarification of sort of a trust in the present moment rather than in the future. And there's on a deep organismic level, there's a part of me that feels like that could potentially, for a person, be the end all be all of, like, if one can really deeply get grounded in the present, then suddenly the mind isn't reaching for the answers of, but what about this, anymore? And then that sort of naturally allows the anxiety to subside. But I know a lot of people are going to feel like they don't have the capacity to not then trust the present. They're going to ask the question, what does it even mean to trust the present? And then suddenly, which in some sense is a valid question, which I'd be curious to hear you elaborate on, but it almost seems like on some level, the question somehow, and the question is the answer, in the sense of, like, when one is truly present, that question of how does one trust the present suddenly doesn't, or it becomes like a non-starter. It becomes sort of erased, becomes nichts a little bit. But I'm curious for the person who doesn't feel like they can ground into the present like that, and that question comes up, what does that mean when you say, okay, I need to trust in the present? What is that? What does that mean?
Yeah, I'm really glad you're asking me to clarify that. And I believe the way we trust in the present begins in our body.
Mm.
Has to do with, can we feel the floor underneath us? Do we believe it'll support us? Can we feel our spine as we sit in the chair? It begins with orienting in the present. And if what comes up is what I don't trust about the present, then we explore that. So it is really a practice of mindfulness in the sense of, oh, well, I don't really trust that you're going to tell me the truth, or that an earthquake isn't going to happen. I want to get at that with people through situating them in the present moment. The here and now in Gestalt therapy, the here is the physical here. So much of this is talking about mental constructs and imaginings that are related to the body, but they're not here and now. They're not in this moment. So can you feel yourself here? Can I feel myself? My mouth is dry as I'm talking to you. Can I feel that? Oh, the more we become aware of the present moment, the less we go to the future. However, if there's something of concern in the present moment that I experience, then we have to work through that. So, okay, well, like, these are uncertain times for people. They really are. I think when you talked about, you're going to be isolated, I thought, what a great way to describe the quarantine. It goes on forever. I think people are very afraid of that. What I want to do is encourage people to come back to, and now. And now, what are you aware of? Now, how do you experience yourself? That might happen, yes. In order to first get them really rooted, go down into the root chakra. Feel the ground. But there is something here all along that we're talking about that is about impermanence. I was just reading about Buddha about an hour ago. And the truth that we believe is, of course, everything is impermanent. Everything falls away. Our lives, we do die. We do get older. Things change. So sometimes anxiety is very rooted in trying to fight that. But I still would work it as how someone's trying to fight it now, rather than get into a discussion about as if I know what's going to happen in the future. I don't tell people you're going to be safe. How would I know? That's the hard thing. We don't know. But we do know, if I'm here and I'm safe right now and I could feel my feet here, that we know. It is a very Buddhist way of looking at this. I know that. But what comes up in working this way is the story of people's fears. When you invite them into present, they get clearer about what they're afraid of. And I want to explore that with them in their body in the present moment. Because that's where the support is.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And sort of in a way that for me goes beyond mind, which is very satisfying. It feels like almost feels like my body understands it better than my mind.
Yeah.
Which to be more specific, is this sense of like allowing my body to sort of guide the mind into presence, because the body feels like it is always present in a certain way.
Yeah.
And the mind is just like the mind is the this person, the scaredy cat. And
I think we're also taught not to trust our body in our
mm,
culture.
interesting.
So, go
Is
on.
that a Western thing specifically?
I think it's very Western,
Uh-huh.
very much the Judeo tradition. The body is the source of sin, or body is an it that we need to manage, or is somehow going to betray us. And there's a lot of that, and there's a lot about you know uh, how we dress to cover ourselves in the West. And yeah, I think we're taught that from an early age. And then if that's what you're taught, and then you have an experience, well, if you're taught and supported, or you've had to learn to not make your body yourself, to leave your body from, say, trauma, when this occurs, you have no home to sit in.
Mm.
All you're left to do is to try to figure it out.
Mm.
that is postmodernity. That is the Western world.
Mm.
And I think it's deeply rooted in how we look at a body as either an enemy or kind of a machine we take to the gym and make strong or do yoga with. But the work is, this is me. Here I am. Can I trust and know and believe this is me?
Mm. Yeah. Nice. It feels like this is a good, I think a good amount of information and a good energy just sort of leave people with for now. Maybe maybe that's
Sure.
just because I'm feeling extra present and sort of just bathing in it a bit, and it feels like something has settled, and I think people listening will hopefully feel the same way. So
Sure.
I
Thank you, Nico.
yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been super, super insightful and just nourishing on all levels. So yeah, I really appreciate your time.
Okay.
Sweet.
Yeah, ditto, and give my best to your co-inhabitants where you are.
Will do. Yeah, they send their love as well. And yeah,
Very much.
sometime down the line, I hope we can do this again.
I'd love to. Thank you,
Great.
Nico.
Thank you so much.
All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye for now. Thank you for making it this far in the episode. I want to offer you the key points that I distilled from this discussion with Michael so that next time you're dealing with anxiety, you'll have a bit more of a roadmap or some more tools to navigate it. And so the first thing that stood out to me that Michael brought to the table was in that moment of anxiety, bringing a bit more focus onto the breath and seeing if we can extend the in-breath and the out-breath by just an extra second from what we're already breathing at. So if we're breathing in for a second, out for a second, let's make it 2 seconds, then maybe 3, maybe 4, and see if we can just drop into that for a moment, because what that does in my experience is it awakens us a bit more to the immediacy of the moment. We start to feel our body moving, we start to feel maybe our feet and our hands start to become a bit more present with the environment around us. And what this does on a very practical level is calms down our nervous system, allows us to make clear decisions, and it allows us to just have many more resources in the moment to deal with whatever situation might be arising. And so once we've connected more to the breath and extended the in-breath and the out-breath a bit more, and we're feeling just a tiny bit more calm and aware of ourselves and aware of the moment, aware of the present moment, we can take that sense of groundedness and presence and take it into whatever our worst case scenario is. And I only recommend this for people who are feeling relatively stable within themselves. If there's a sense of even the thought of deepening the breath being almost impossible, then you're in the realm of dealing with some probably much deeper trauma, which I don't recommend doing this form of introspection with by yourself. I would recommend seeing someone for that, someone like Michael, for example. But for those of you who feel like going into this exploration isn't going to make your anxiety unmanageable, then there are two different roads that work completely in conjunction, but two different avenues that I've taken. One is using my newfound connection to my immediate experience, aka the present moment. I allow that connection to be my anchor as I go and imagine what the worst case scenario is that is creating my anxiety. So for me, it has to do with safety and not being supported. So I would imagine what the worst manifestation of that would look like. And I stay connected to my breath, which is the portal to the present, to the now. And I allow the imagination to play out while I take notice of what's happening within my body. And while I don't try to change whatever's happening, I just notice it and give it this holding space to express itself and unravel. So that's one avenue for you deep divers out there who are feeling up for it. It can be a profoundly healing experience to do that. And only you'll know if you're mentally ready to go into that, because it can be quite intense to imagine your worst case scenario. But if you're ready for it, you'll know. And it can be a profoundly healing experience. So it's helped me a lot. And then the second road, but really just a benefit of this breath portal into the immediacy of the moment, is that whatever situation is arising in the present moment, we have so much more facility to deal with it. You know, if the thing that we're imagining that's going to give us anxiety actually happens, are we going to deal with it better if we're in that state of anxiety and our breath is all caught up? Or are we going to manage it better if we've taken a second to actually really sincerely connect to our breath a little bit more and just be like, okay, I might still be freaked out, but at least my breath is flowing now. And before, I felt like I was just a nervous wreck and I wasn't in touch with any part of the present moment, but now I feel like, okay, I'm here dealing with it. What it do? You know, what is happening right now? We can actually understand what's happening and make decisions to manage it in a way that will be more beneficial than if we weren't present. So there's really only upside to this, and the breath is the portal to this upside, because really the breath brings us into the immediacy of the present moment, which is where anxiety finds its ground, and we can just let it be actively. It's like an active letting go. So yeah, I hope that made sense, and I hope that distilled the points a little bit more. And I thank you for tuning in. I hope this helped you, and I'll see you in the next one.